Hello and welcome back to Politigood. My name is Rachel Parker.
And I'm Tim Fullerton.
Tim, I think this is a little bit of a flex. It's our last podcast of the year that we started at the end of the year.
That is true. What is this, episode 4?
Yeah. And not only is it like so we're doing like a best of 2024 when we've done 4 episodes, but I felt like it was really important because our goal is to be a little bit of a shining light. It doesn't mean that everything that we shine a light on is going to be positive news, but we hope to shine a light by way of the people that are highlighting the things that are bad sometimes. But I really wanted this episode just to talk about good things from 2024, because right now there's so much stuff happening that is objectively sort of terrifying if you're a reasonable human being. I don't think the most powerful billionaire on earth suddenly aligning himself with a Nazi party in Germany is like a great thing to wake up to, which is what we all saw today.
Yep.
Oopsie.
Plus a pending government shutdown. I mean, I assume.
Yeah.
I assume by the time people listen to this will have been solved. But we are on Friday morning here.
Yeah.
And there doesn't appear to be a plan. And Elon Musk is tweeting support for the German neo-Nazi party and all kinds of bad stuff.
So we could have easily done kind of like these are the good things and these are the bad things. We could have easily, I think people who listen to us already know that like you and I could tear into the fecklessness of Mike Johnson, and we could, we could go on and on and on about Meta and Mark Zuckerberg and $1 million to Trump. No. We're not going to do any of that. We're going to talk about things that are giving us that gave us a sense of hope and are the bright spots of 2024. So I confined Tim to several categories, and I'm going to send this over to you first. So there were a couple things. So it basically, we're thinking of this like a draft, this is a draft. And the first category was kind of social media related. What was your social media highlight of 2024?
Wow. There were a couple, actually. I'm going to give you 2. So the first was that I actually started using TikTok religiously for the first time, not just as a consumer, but to use it to put out content, because what I was finding was that Democrats don't really use it that much, or progressives, and it's really dominated by conservative voices. And so in July, I decided, you know what, I'm going to get over myself and being on camera and just start doing this and talking about, the campaign and things like that. And it actually ended up being something really fun to do, and I got a decent following out of it and all of that. So I really enjoyed using it, and I hope it doesn't go away next month. But I think they'll figure something out eventually, but it may go away for a little while. But it was really fun to use that. And then also I just really like the rise of Blue Sky that has sort of taken over a lot of the discussion over the past, I'll say, month. As people have continued to flee X, and instead of going to Threads, they've gone to Blue Sky, which isn't owned by a billionaire, which is really nice, and seems to take moderation seriously, which no one else really seems to do, and has been a really nice platform to sort of get some of that pre-Elon Twitter feeling that we used to talk about back in the day. So I think those are my 2 social media ones.
You took mine. I was going to say using TikTok. I was going to say that like journalists finally realized that it's time to leave X. That was going to be one, which you kind of captured. So I'm going to say I second the Blue Sky, because I feel like the other thing is that Twitter was never a good product. We like to pretend like it was. I heard Nilay Patel on, who I think is just fantastic, the editor of The Verge. I think he's great. And I heard him on something, and they were talking about like, the fall of social media and the rise of whatever. I don't know what the topic was. And someone tried to say, what? Remember when Twitter was so awesome and it was just so great, and Neil A. Patel in the middle of the conversation was like, "It didn't make any money." Like he just started shouting. It was like,
Right.
It wasn't ever a good product. It was failing. It wouldn't have been for sale if it was good, right? Like it would have just been like, Jack Dorsey would have still been the chairman of the board, and he wouldn't have been fired twice and all that. So anyway, so I second the blue sky, and I think it's going to be a better product than Twitter was. I think it's going to be more usable. I think it's going to have better features. I think it's going to be better run, all of those things. And it's weird that Dorsey left because he didn't like moderation. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's one good news, is that Jack Dorsey doesn't have anything to do with Blue Sky anymore. Maybe that's,
I was going to say, I actually think that is a good thing. And I mean, especially seeing his bent towards the, conspiracies and anti-vax and RFK Jr. and all this stuff. He can stay away from that platform.
I want everybody to pretend like he's not from St. Louis, which is where I live. I would like, let's all we would
I actually didn't know that. Okay.
We'd like to
I won't
sell
hold it
him
against you.
To whatever land of weirdness that Silicon Valley bros are all from. We can say he's from there. But I'm going to build on what you said. And I'm just going to broadly say that my favorite social media evolution of 2024 is just kind of the rise of the understanding of federated platforms. And speaking of Jack Dorsey, what's a shame about his kind of like ridiculousness that he's embracing is that he's one of the first people that started really popularizing how important it was. And so the notion, so it's interesting to see that it's something he helped start and then abandon at the same time, in a way. But I think we're not quite, I would say that like we haven't hit this critical mass yet, but for the first time, and one of my other low key stories, it's not so much social related, but it's tech related, is that like the FTC finally took a sledgehammer to Google to break that monster up so we could all start seeing innovation in advertising and search and all kinds of other things. We'll see how that actually works. But they have to sell Chrome. That's so great. Like, or at least like they have to decouple Chrome, which I think is so awesome. But I think that's where I think things are going to start to get kind of interesting. It's gonna take some adjustment for people that are maybe used to a different kind of web. I am accustomed to things feeling a bit more fragmented because of my era. I'm in my mid 50s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was in my 20s in the 90s. So I'm used to the idea of having to absorb things from different places and in different formats and kind of spending a little more time grabbing a newspaper, listening to a radio station. Like that's kind of how I evolved.
Yep.
And I think the media ecosystem was healthier for it. I don't think that we should all be using the same platforms at the same time to have millions of different conversations for millions of different reasons. It makes it very difficult for the owners of those platforms to figure out how to ship features.
Right.
Like, who are we doing this for? I'm excited to see the innovation behind more federated services. For the first time yesterday on Threads, someone on probably a Mastodon server commented on a post that I made, and I couldn't do anything with it. Like I couldn't share it, I couldn't respond to it, but I was like, oh, it's happening. Which is the only reason I'm still on Threads, by the way, is because it's federated. So that's my number one. So the next one, the next category is going to be a little bit more difficult, and I'm gonna go to you, and then we'll come to me, and then we'll go back to you, we'll come back to me. So I made Tim Fullerton, everyone, in the year of our Lord that is 2024, person who worked on the White Dudes for Harris project, right? I made that person tell me 2 positive things about politics in 2024. And now he's going to share his first one with you. And I have no idea what these are going to be, by the way. I have no idea. So, okay, number 1, what is it? Go.
Oh, I think we got some internet problems here.
We do. You're Skippy all over the place.
It's me because we added a mesh network. So that's the problem. I didn't turn it off.
Okay.
So we'll just cut this part out.
Do you want to turn it off right now?
Let me, just hold on. Let me see if I could do that.
Okay. We're waiting for Tim. Tim's gotta turn off the mesh network, and I'm making up a song right now. 'Cause I had a lot of coffee this morning, and I'm wearing my new glasses. My new glasses are cool. Tim's turning off his mesh network so I can understand what he's saying.
That's the problem. Never mind.
He's figuring out what's going on right now. Ba-da-ba-ba-da.
I don't know if that's going to be any better, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I just give my answers?
Yeah, let's go. So, how do we want to do this? I'm just going to start over again. You ready?
Okay.
Okay, so let's hear your answer to what was your first good politics-related thing of 2024?
So I actually think there are many.
I do too. I do too, actually. Yeah.
But I am gonna go national and say that I think that it was really great that we elected 2 black women to the United States Supreme Court, the United States Senate, and the first ever Korean American man to
Correct.
the Senate.
That's right.
We also elected a Latino man from Arizona. So the Democratic caucus in the Senate will be more diverse and younger, which is important, than it ever has. And I think that is a really, really good thing. The other one, yeah. So those
so we're gonna do those, and then we're gonna come to me. So I'm gonna build. So you me. Okay. So all right. So I'm gonna respond to those things really quickly. So because I think the Gallego, this is the one I'm the most caffeinated enough to respond to. Ruben Gallego beat Carrie Lake. Like you can't overstate how important that is.
Yeah.
Barely, he eked out a very important victory to someone who ran on a solidly MAGA message twice and lost twice. 2-time loser, Carrie Lake. So that woman has to walk around for the rest of her life with 2-time loser on her back. Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Yep. We see you and we appreciate you. Okay, so my first good story of 2024, mine, unlike yours, just because of where I live, are going to be Missouri-based.
Okay.
And the first one is, because I have to shout this out, Amendment 3 passed in Missouri. So we had, there's a lot of things that I could say just positively about how Democratic candidates ran in 2024 in Missouri. I think we had less open, we had fewer unopposed state rep off races than ever. So the recruiting game was solid. And I just want to say really quickly, shout out to Alex Johnson, who that's his gig. Like he does that for the party, and he does it he's done it for the last, I don't know how many cycles. He'd have to tell me specifically, but you want to talk about a thankless job is being somebody who's responsible for Democratic candidates in Missouri, because everybody screams at you that you're not doing it right. And why aren't we doing this? And he just goes out and finds people who will run for office in a state where we have these really draconian term limits. So it's constant churn. Anyway, but that's not the one that I picked. The one that I picked is we legalized abortion in Missouri. And the way the law was written is going to, of course, be met with the usual Republican challenges. There's a really weird language in the bill that says basically that an abortion can be carried out until the point of fetal viability, and fetal viability is not a medical term. And nope. I still don't know why the hell that was in there. It felt like a compromise at the time, but it's going to be very difficult for them to make it completely illegal. And I think that there's going to be mud on their shoes if that's where they spend all of their political capital. That is where the Missouri Attorney General has decided he's going to focus all of his time, is trying to overturn the will of the voters. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm just, we have really unforgivably high levels of mortality rates amongst women of color while they give childbirth. It's third world levels. It's terrible. So that can't get worse. You know what I mean? Like, we can't
Right.
afford to lose more lives to pregnancy complications and childbirth complications. So I'm just really proud of the people that did the work here. It's again, like, a good story in a tough cycle. Okay, so your number 2 good story from 2024 is?
I'm going to go local, but it's going to be something that is was a bad story and then it became a good story, and that is that New York City is about to implement congestion pricing, which is going to be the first congestion pricing plan in the United States. What it's going to do is it is going to charge people $9 to enter certain sections, the most congested parts of New York City, during certain parts of the day. And that money is going to go to public transit. And if you've ever been to New York City, where I live, if I could, well, I don't know if I'd say ban cars completely, but I would be pretty fine with a lot less. So I'm very excited that there are progressive plans being implemented that will improve the lives of people, because this will, one, allow the MTA, which runs the subways and the buses, to upgrade and fix problems, but also expand. There's talks of increasing access in certain areas, mostly in underserved areas, because they tend to be in the further outer borough parts of the city. But also, it will make our air cleaner and, reduce the amount of carbon that we're putting into the air, which is, as we all know, it's not even a ticking time bomb because the bomb has gone off.
Right. The bomb happened.
The bomb is off, and now we are in a mitigation phase. So I am hoping that this, there's going to be a lot of belly aching, and it originally got canceled, and then they brought it back at a little bit lower rate. I would have preferred it to have stayed at the $15, but $9 is still good. It's going to make New York City better and healthier. And so I am super, super excited to see that. And it's really the best climate mitigation plan that anybody has implemented in the United States so far. So very excited about that. That is great news for us.
And it makes so much sense because I've been to New York many times, and when I see people driving in a car, my first thought is like, unless you're going to the airport or something, why are you doing that? I understand, like, being in a cab, I get that,
right?
And London's congestion pricing, for example, allows taxis into the kind of more touristy areas, because that makes sense. Like, if you're a tourist, you probably want a taxi. But, like, New York is designed to be on foot. Those streets are narrow. They were never designed for the amount of cars that are on them. It's expensive to maintain roads in places where potholes develop. So I think that you could see that maybe in other places. I think, like, Philly, Boston. I'm just throwing cities out from the top of my head that are similarly structured and have similar public transportation. So Chicago, San Francisco. Oh my God, San Francisco's congestion problem at a certain time.
Yeah.
And at some point, like, I know this sounds crazy, they're going to have to do something in Los Angeles. Because LA is developing some pretty robust public transportation. When I left, because of ride sharing, public transportation, and good weather, and it's relatively flat, so you can ride a bike a lot of places. And actually, LA has pretty good public transportation. It's just a very big place, and people commute from, the Valley and the South Bay and stuff. So we'll see. I mean, it's not practical right now, obviously, for LA to do that, but there are parts of town where, when we interviewed Mark Levine as the Manhattan Borough President, that was episode 3, which you all should check out because it was great, and we talk a lot about congestion pricing in that episode. He was talking about times of day when you're going through Manhattan where you can only drive, like, what did he say, like 8 miles an hour or something like that, or 4 miles an hour.
It's
So that is the situation in West Los Angeles too. So if you're trying to cross Los Angeles, like from like 3 o'clock on, 2:30 on, maybe it's even earlier now. If you are on the west side, so say like west of Fairfax, east of the ocean, you cannot move more than 4 to 5 miles an hour.
Yep.
So I think this is an interesting test. I'm super happy for it. I agree with you. That is a great story, and I'm glad you highlighted it again. We'll see how it stands up to scrutiny. So I want to say, by the way, really quickly, my runner-up for my second favorite thing in politics in 2024 also very local. Cori Bush is the outgoing rep that represents Missouri's 1st District. And her farewell address was banging. I mean, it'll be in the show notes. I'm not particularly interested in getting into a debate right now about whether or not she should be the rep from St. Louis. That's a different conversation. And we could talk about my frustrations with Wesley Bell later and the chaos that he left the prosecutor's office in and the amount of money it's costing and the headache and the whatever. And why did you do this just to primary a Democrat, blah, blah. But it reminded me of why she was there. Like just a true fighter for working people. That's her thing. And she really went out on that note with like the squad behind her, all of them. And she should have asked them to come here and campaign for her. Anyway, okay. That's her. Whatever. She doesn't have very sharp elbows. That's the one critical thing I'll say of hers. But I applaud what she said. All right, my real number 2. Back to Missouri. We passed another. It's not an amendment. It was a proposition, so we didn't update the Constitution. But it was a voter-passed bill that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026, and will force employers to pay paid family leave. So that is a huge development in a state that previously updated its minimum wage by voter proposition to $12 an hour. And, you know, people think that places have like St. Louis, unquestionably, parts of Missouri have unquestionably low cost of living. When you look at the cost of housing, it is considerably less expensive to live where I live than where Tim lives. That's a laughable comparison. But sometimes there are certain costs that you don't, like gas is cheaper for sure. But then there are other things where the costs are just fixed. The price of a car is the price of a car.
Right.
The cost of groceries is about the same. The cost of clothing, the cost to eat, to heat and cool your home. These are things that cost about the same everywhere. So when they go up in places like New York, where you have higher wages, while the cost of housing is still much more expensive, the increase of wages does help defray the cost of all other things, right? So we really do need people to be paid better in Missouri. And of course, there is a group, this link will be in the show notes. There is a group of plaintiffs who are suing the state to overturn the amendment. And they're all pro-business groups. So, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and the NFIB and these very, and I don't know why pro-business groups have decided they have to just keep siding against workers. On what planet do you think that you can hire someone who's decent and qualified for less than an affordable wage?
Right.
And they can't fill jobs right now. And there's this ridiculous narrative going on that I've seen this happen, where they post signs that say, "Sorry, we had to close early. We can't hire anyone. People just don't want to work." Well, for that amount of money, they don't want to work. Right. They have other options. They have other choices. So that's
right.
So anyway, so I'm thrilled. We'll see how it goes. I don't think they're going to be successful because of the way the proposition was written. It was written to withstand scrutiny. Mm-hmm. So you're again, why put the target on your back? Why put the target on your back and say it's going to be bad for business for you to hire qualified people at a reasonable amount of money? Good luck.
And what's happening is that we're essentially at what economists call full employment, which means that people have choices. So, you can make an argument that it's just economic forces that are dictating what the prices are, and if you're not willing to do it, then you're not going to get the workers. So, and that problem is only going to get worse when Donald Trump begins implementing his deportation plans, which his goal and tariffs, but his goal is to deport 15 million undocumented workers and essentially kick them out, including their children, even if they were born here, which means that they are citizens. That's 15 million workers that are going to be removed from the workforce. They're going to stop paying Social Security and Medicare, even though they don't get the benefits they pay them. Payroll taxes, all of these things, this problem is only going to get worse. So I'm glad that Missouri has done this, and other states. I mean, New York's minimum wage now, we're I think in the 18 to 20 range, which for New York, and it's tiered. The upstate is it kind of came in later and things like that. But this notion that you're going to get a good worker at a low wage is just unrealistic, and they're seeing that, and that's the reality of when you have an economy. I know all the Republicans and everybody say is terrible, but most people, if they want a job, they've got one. So you need to pay in order to get a quality worker.
And there's and this idea that like it's bad for business or it's bad for the economy. Like we've had long enough of like mandatory minimum wage increases because Congress won't do its job.
Right.
Really, the Republicans are the ones that keep blocking it. And that's why I love Cori Bush's farewell address so much, because she basically is like, if were it not for all these people in Congress, this is all the stuff that we would have right now. This was Biden's agenda. And she just goes through it. Yeah. And in states where you've had enough years to know whether or not minimum wage increases were going to be harmful to the local economy, there's tons of data that shows that it's not.
It's not.
It never is.
Never. Ever.
Never.
No, because they put the money back into the economy. They spend it. And that's I've said Rachel Maddow had a great thing a few years ago talking about the economic benefit of essentially food stamps, SNAP benefits.
Right.
Because the reality is that money is not only helping to feed that family,
but they are
spending it all in the community. It is one of the best stimuluses that we can do. And it started to be vilified in the 80s and then in the 90s, right? And like these like welfare family, all this horrible, mostly racist Reagan stuff. And Bill Clinton and Blue Dogs went along with it in the 90s. And the reality is that it is not. It is a economic driver, and it also is just the right thing to do. And
you could also stand all on a roof all you want, wave your hands, and say, "Hi." Most of the people in America who are poor are not people of color, and a lot of them live in rural communities where their local economies were eviscerated by the very kind of neoliberalism that Reagan, blah, 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 whatever. We're supposed to be talking about good things, Tim. What happened? Okay, so let's get back on track.
Okay,
You did your two good things. Okay, so there's two more. One is I want you to kind of talk about in general, like just like a business topic, something from the world of business, communications, strategy, that you were like, that is the thing of the year that I just thought was the most impressive, or that you were the most affected or inspired by. And it is?
Oh my God. It's tough because this year in business as a macro discussion, was good from an economic perspective, but you still see the issues with workers and things like that.
Of course.
And I kind of want to flip it a little bit.
Okay.
And
this is your show. You can do it.
It's my show. I guess I get this the rules that I can do whatever I want.
That's right.
But I think that 2025, and this is going to take me a minute, so buckle up, folks. But
yeah, sure.
2024, I think, was the year that many Americans woke up to the fact that privatizing all things is not a good idea. And I think you probably know where I'm going to go with this. And this is in relation to that horrible event, and it was a horrible event, a few weeks ago when the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, was gunned down in Manhattan, a couple miles from where I live. And, I am still not, I'm not in agreement with the celebration of anybody being murdered. But what I was very surprised about was to see the underlying rage across the spectrum, This was not just Democrats who were mad about the election and needed an outlet. Everybody, it opened the conversation to the fact that our health insurance system and healthcare system in this country is horrendously broken, and everybody agrees.
Right.
Everybody
it's not controversial
agrees
to say that, right? Yeah.
Because everybody's got a story about somebody either being denied care, delayed care, sitting on hold for hours on end to get an answer. Yep. And I think and and all of this isn't really anything about Brian Thompson and Luigi, what's his name, the shooter. It opened up the door to the conversation, and I think that it came about in an unhealthy way, but I think the conversation is going to be a healthy one. And even when we saw Ben Shapiro, who has a podcast that's slightly more popular than ours, went after Democrats as a whole for celebrating the murder of Brian Thompson, which was not what was happening.
That was not what was happening, no.
His own supporters destroyed him in the comments for standing with big business and against working people.
Yeah, do you not understand how populism works, you asshole? He doesn't.
Yeah, well, first of all, he doesn't. But he also, if he gets poked there's so many videos online of people when he gets into debates, he loses them every time because
he's not very
his
smart.
thought process is about an inch thick. But anyways, but his own people were like, you are standing with business. And I think greed, right? Like United denies the most claims of any health insurance in the country. And Brian Thompson was there when it went to 32%, I believe. 1 in 3 get denied. So I think that there is a positive. Democrats are kind of in the wilderness right now. I hope that most people that are in charge are looking at this and realizing that this could potentially be a path back from the wilderness. And that is, and I'm going to sound a little bit like Bernie Sanders here. And I'll be honest, I've never endorsed him for anything. I'm a
Sanders kind of girl, so
yeah,
go
it's fine.
nuts.
But
go
actually,
nuts.
with him and Biden, I think he's been great. But
totally.
But that working people, working class elements,
middle class,
right? Everybody deals with it, right? I think that 2020, because there was no discussion about healthcare in the election, and I think that was a massive mistake. Zero,
huge.
And I think that the Democrats need to start talking about this, and I think they need to start talking about breaking it.
Yeah.
And whether it's Medicare for all, which by the way, Medicare has 2% administrative costs, in which private insurers have 20-30%.
Yeah.
It is a more efficient program. It is not perfect, but I think there need to be conversations about that again. And I think that there is a wide swath of Americans across the political spectrum that are interested in this. And that to me is the most important business story.
And and that's really, no, you're right. And do you know who I think, that's really a good point. Do you know who I think is somebody who can really lead on this because of things that she said when she ran for president, things that she's done to break up antitrust? You know who I'm going to say in a minute. And just the way that she can go on a mic and eviscerate people, but also remain relatable and likable, is Amy Klobuchar. So one of the biggest problems we have is consolidation. So we've allowed all these companies to kind of vertically integrate so that healthcare systems are insurers and own hospitals, and they're able to kind of sideline sort of financial antitrust law in a way that they're not very well regulated. And one conversation I used to have with my old podcast partner, Adam, whose daughter is severely disabled. And my husband, for people who don't know this, I don't know that I've really said this in the show before. I don't think I have. My husband had a double lung transplant in 2018. And I've had my own fair share of stuff too. Most people don't get to be 55 without having to have something happen to you. If you haven't, you're super lucky. Congratulations. And both of us would say things. We wrote pieces like this on our old website that were like, you shouldn't have to be as smart as me or a lawyer to navigate healthcare, the labyrinth of healthcare stuff, right? And I am able to do that because of my personality, because I'm not intimidated by anybody, because I've had medical procedures before, because I understand how explanation of benefits statements work, because I don't know, just because of all those things. And we've been relatively lucky in my husband's, my mutual journeys, that we haven't had a lot of sort of financial, because of the Affordable Care Act, actually. And I think that that's one area where you're absolutely right. Kamala Harris always kind of waffled in her message about healthcare. I think that was one of her problems when she was a candidate in 2020. She kind of was like, Medicare, I don't know, maybe. Yeah. And Amy Klobuchar from day one was like, look, we have this thing. It's called the Affordable Care Act. We can make it work for us if we really know what we're doing. And we also have to break up the big healthcare monopoly. And I was like, everyone needs to listen to what she's saying because she's absolutely right. Like, you kind of have to sort of use reconciliation now to get what you want. And if we expand Medicaid access, right, and if we slowly start to titrate down the age of Medicare eligibility, you can slowly but surely, it's going to take a while, but you can get there. And I think that's one of the great tragedies of Joe Manchin's legacy and Kyrsten Sinema's legacy is that is exactly what Joe Biden tried to do, and he was shut down. But I think that you're correct that we are going to get back to having this conversation because everybody wants to have it. There isn't a single American, unless you're an asshole, right, who doesn't want to have this conversation. So really quickly, my business related topic is going to be in the area, and this is not going to surprise Tim Fullerton. Very soon, as soon as you guys get to know me better, it's not going to surprise any of you either. It's going to be journalism related because the survival of journalism is critical for democracy. And I know everybody's mad at the New York Times right now, and everybody's mad at these publishers. Washington, everybody's mad at Jeff Bezos, as they should be at ABC, as they should be at the LA Times, whatever. That's a different conversation, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because that is not good news. That is bad news. Again, we're going to go really local because I think it has a lot to say about what is possible to sustain local journalism. Because I think that we look at journalism from the nation down, right? So the New York Times has become a national newspaper when it has New York in the name. It should just be the Washington Post was supposed to be the Washington Post. The LA Times was supposed to be the LA Times, right? These are local news institutions that started to falter after they lost classified ads money because of Craigslist. And then, Google just sopped up the rest of the dough. And then Facebook came in, and then they had this, basically like ad duopoly. So what do you do, right? So St. Louis, had the Village Voice of St. Louis was called the Riverfront Times, and it was around, actually the person who founded it ran for Congress against Ed Wagner. He's a great local character named Ray Hartman. He's just we should have him on sometime. He's just a funny weirdo, but really smart, about, the guy has forgotten more about St. Louis and Missouri in the last 30 seconds than I will ever know in my life because he's been reporting on it since forever. So he was the founder, and it did a wonderful job, like all free weekly newspapers did, whether it was The Voice or the LA Weekly or whatever, the San Francisco Weekly, at one point the Guardian in San Francisco, did a great job of following up on hyper local stories, whether it's opening a restaurant opening or corruption or whatever. And the Riverfront Times was basically like it just the bottom fell out this year, and it happened overnight. Nobody was told they were getting laid off, and there were the managing editor was a woman named Sarah Fensky, and she actually used to be the managing editor of the LA Times for a while. She has a really interesting background, and she ran a great team. They were doing really good work, and it was really for me, it was a shock to the system. I was like, because the St. Louis Post-Dispatch has been owned by a private equity firm called Lee Enterprises for a while, and they're just kind of, again, like, what? Just it's not. That's another not great story. And they're struggling. So about what felt like 10 minutes later, I don't know, it was like a few days. It was less than a week, I think. St. Louis Magazine, which looks like all those local magazines. It has the same header. It's kind of that, like, you see it in the grocery store aisle. You probably pass it by. You probably don't really think about it. But those local magazines break big stories sometimes. Like Los Angeles Magazine, for example, used to break big stories. And they scooped up Sarah Fensky and another writer named Ryan Krull, and they now have a daily newsletter called Appropriately Left, St. Louis Daily, that reports on local stories. They have already uncovered stories about local corruption, including someone who was at the St. Louis Planning, an inspector who had to resign because he appropriated like $2.7 million in ARPA funding. And they've only been doing this for like 6 months. So that to me is an example of like if we're all going to do this, we have to do it together. And so I want to congratulate St. Louis Magazine for just the risk and understanding the newsletter business in a way that I think is just excellent. I had been a subscriber already, but like find those stories in your local community. Find those organizations, those local organizations, the local publishers, who are doing the work of supporting and sustaining local journalism. So it's one of my favorite things in all of 2024, and I'm so glad I get to talk about it. Okay, so for our last, did you have anything you'd like to say to any of that, Tim Fullerton, before I go on?
Look, you are much more of an expert on this than I am, but I could not agree with you more that like the death of local journalism is devastating for lots of reasons, and I'm glad that there are some green shoots out there to show the potential way forward. And I hope that this happens in other cities, because without them, then you're right, like those stories don't get covered, and people get away with things that they shouldn't be. So and I think it's really great.
And it's hard. Like the other thing that I'll say too is that like what I think one of the issues we're having in America right now is that the people who are writing about what's happening in America live in thriving cities and metropolises that have problems, right? But they're not wanting of resources,
right?
In the same way. So if somebody leaves the New York Times, or even if, I know the Village Voice is just also running on fumes. All these places are. But if you guys were to, if New York City were to lose a certain kind of like local, again, I'm not saying that it should, but if it did, someone somewhere will be like, I bet you, because it's New York, I could start something and make some money doing sort of local journalism, investigative journalism out of New York City, about New York City, because there's so much of an appetite for it. When St. Louis loses a resource like Sarah Fensky, who knows everyone at City Hall, Ryan knows a ton of people locally, and St. Louis is a complicated, every place has its complexities. And when you lose those people, you can't replace them. That's the hard part that people don't understand. You're not going to, without the right job, nobody's going to be like, you know what I want to do? I want to move to St. Louis, bust my ass, making relationships with local sources who trust me for no money, raise a family, and then hope that someday I'll be able to turn this into a successful venture that allows me to live a comfortable. Nobody's going to do that. If they do, God bless them. So that is why I think it's so important too, is that when they leave, what do you replace them with? It's not that straightforward. So, okay. So thanks for that. Okay. So your last category was literally dealer's choice. I was like, I don't care what it is, just your favorite. It can be pop culture. It can be this restaurant that opened around the corner from my house that I go to all the time. They have great tea, whatever. Like Tim Fullerton's just like random, weird, non-categorical favorite thing of 2024.
Oh man, it is hard. And you prepped me, so I'm not surprised. And when you asked me these questions, and our creative directors asked me questions too about the agency that we run, Fullerton Strategies, and he asked me what type of music would be playing to describe it.
Oh yeah,
and I literally changed my answer, I think 50 times, because I come from a family that, and this will be relevant to my pick, but I come from a very musical family, even though I am not. My dad was a guitar player, played piano.
You can sing though.
Well, yeah. I did this. My brother and I, for those who don't know, my brother and I recorded a song that my dad wrote. He wrote it in the 60s, and I'd actually gotten it for him. I got him studio time in New York City to re-record it, and the three of us were supposed to do it, but unfortunately, my dad got sick and passed away. And one of the last things I talked to him about was that my brother and I were going to do the song, and we did, and it's on YouTube now, on my YouTube channel. You can check it out. But anyway, so like we did it, and I got up the courage to sing it, and so that my brother and I both do it, and then my brother plays the instruments, and our producer guy did a little bit in there too. But anyways, so music is very important to me, and I think that it's funny because this is related, because I was struggling with this answer earlier, and I was thinking about some of the music I listened to this year, like Franz Ferdinand's a band that I really like, and they've put out 2 songs from their album that comes out next year that are both really great, and I'm really excited about that. But something that just like made me feel good, and I think will make a lot of people feel good, and this literally happened last night, and I literally just looked at it on my phone an hour ago, was that Paul McCartney had a show at the O2 in London, and he had Ringo come out, and they played a couple songs, and it just, my dad was the biggest Beatles fan on earth. Like I always heard him practicing and playing Beatles songs in the basement when he was doing that, and we found some recording stuff of him, and it's just, you know, it's one of those things that is just like a feel good. Like there isn't anybody that hates Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr. Like, I mean, they did some things in the 60s and 70s that probably people didn't like, but like they're just like,
Paul McCartney's first wife probably has some fairly unpleasant things to say about it, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Second wife, probably not his first. He has had 3, so it was the one in between that was the problem. But anyways,
okay.
Not problem, but they just didn't get along.
Didn't he get married before Linda? Wasn't there a starter wife? Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, he had a girlfriend. Okay. She's fairly well. Anyways, and then but anyways, so it was just like, it's just this like nice thing, and it's like it just makes me, it reminds me of my dad and everything. So that was lovely. Was my
and
my
those guys are in their 80s, like
80s.
They're, you know, and they're still like, they're lucky. I mean, they have good doctors and they're lucky.
Right. I mean, Paul's a billionaire, so and Ringo's not too far behind. So yeah, they're doing it. They're not worried about this healthcare problem. Like,
right. Ringo's an interesting case too, because he pissed away all of his money. Right, like up his nose or whatever. And then, like,
he was an alcoholic. Yeah, and drugs.
Yeah, and so he had to like rebuild his life and start over from scratch. And he doesn't have the publishing that Paul does. Mm-mm. So. And he's just always like, I know people that have met him for like they helped set up for his gigs or whatever. And they were like, I mean, he didn't do his own sound checks or anything. Like, he's not that guy, but they said that he was just the sweetest person and just like very relatable. And they were just like kind of like, and he's used to it. Like, he's used to being Ringo Starr, walking into a room and having everybody kind of like shut down around him. And he's used to kind of cracking jokes and making people feel comfortable. And so I love that about him.
He's also a criminally underrated drummer.
He's a very good drummer.
A lot of people give him a shit, and he, like, and then you listen, then you actually ask real drummers, like, you know, and they're like, no.
Like Stuart Copeland. I was just listening to a podcast with my husband because we're both music nerds, and my husband's a musician. I am not. I just love it. And in fact, I'm going to change my answer because we're talking about music. So we were listening to a podcast with that. I would go into what it is, but it's so nerdy, I don't want to. Anyway, Stuart Copeland, the drummer of the Police, was on, and they were talking. He was talking about, like, you don't think until you start listening that he's really good. Like, he's a very good drummer. He's not the most expert drummer. He's not a jazz drummer, but he kind of defined a certain style of drumming. And I'll maybe I'll throw the link in the show notes to the podcast if you want to hear Stuart Copeland talk about Ringo Starr at the end of the episode. Anyway, so my runner-up, because I have runner-ups because there's too many things I like this year, and one of them was going to be that I could just like go onto the internet and sign up for health insurance that I can afford and be able to remain self-employed. Thanks, Obama. That's one. It's a big one. And then the other one was going to be something about my husband, but then I would start crying because he's really sick right now, and if I start talking about that, then it's going to be we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that we'll get to that at some point when it's an appropriate conversation, and I will talk to you guys about kind of the just uphill challenges that my husband has had to encounter this year. But I will say my co-runner-up is that, like, he's just been a soldier in the face of all of it, and that he's just like a really super generous person. And like, sometimes you don't know that you picked the right person until you watch them go through something terrible, and you're like, God, I picked the right person. You are so amazing. I'm so smart for marrying you. Okay. So my other runner-up I'm switching. So this was going to be my number one, but now this is my actual runner-up. The final season of What We Do in the Shadows. For people that don't know the show, it's on FX. And if you've never seen it before, I'm jealous of you because you get to encounter it for the first time. It's based on the movie. It was adapted by oh God, I just forgot his name. Sorry, the director of the last Thor Ragnarok movie, the two last Thor movies. He's from New Zealand. I just can't remember his name right now.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell
yeah.
you. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
It's so lame, and he's so lovely, and he's if people are going to scream it into their listeners, they're going to be like, "This is his name, Rachel," and I'll be like, "I know." Anyway, he co-stars with Jermaine Clement in the movie version of What We Do in the Shadows, and if you haven't seen that, you should watch it because it's hilarious, and it's a mockumentary about wildly incompetent vampires, and it's super funny. And the movie is set in Auckland, and it's like it came out like 10 years ago, somewhere in there, and it's just screamingly funny. And if you like that kind of like dry meta humor, you're going to love it. And the show is based on the movie, so it's also a mockumentary, but it takes on a very different tone and a very different. And you think, like, after I watched the first season, I was like, how are they going to keep this up? This is so specific, and how are the jokes not going to get stale? And it's one of the most innovative, inventive. It's basically a workplace comedy, kind of like that's the structure of it. And it has one of my favorite British actors in it, a guy named Matt Berry, who's just like he walks in the. He's for people that don't know Toast of London. You should watch that show. It's weird and wonderful. He was on the show called The IT Crowd. Anyway, it has that great balance of like being sweet but not too saccharine, and being funny but not too acerbic. And it's super gory and wonderfully violent. So if you like vampire horror movies, it will satisfy. It has some of the best VFX that I have ever seen in television. They executed week after week after week after week after week of like, just how did they do that? Right? Like, how did they get that done? And as sad as I am to see it off the air, the final episode, I'm not going to spoil anything, aired this week. And again, like, how do you end a show like that? And I think, in my humble estimation, they nailed the landing. It's so exactly how they should have ended it. It's so funny. And it kind of ends on like this meta maximalist high note that I think is like super hard to do when you're in a writer's room of any kind, especially with the kind of headwinds that the entertainment business has been facing lately. Right. So it reminded me how much I just love well executed storytelling, and how much I love good characters and people, the kind of writers. Like, I don't like writing where I feel like the writers don't respect their characters, like where they're patronizing their own characters. I like, even if they're flawed characters, you have to love them. You have to come from a place of seeing them as like fully realized characters. And that's what I think I also love about the show, is that it really, even though they're vampires, they're violent, cruel murderers, they're also like really just wonderfully flawed and fantastic. So that was my runner-up, and I took long on that one. So this one's going to be really quick. This is my actual. Sorry, I forgot. So okay, my real favorite thing of the year was the St. Vincent album, All Born Screaming.
She's great.